The Xenris Survival Institute occupied an orbital platform that cost more than some planetary economies, which seemed delightfully ironic for a place dedicated to teaching people how to live with absolutely nothing. For 3 centuries, the galaxy's most elite families had sent their offspring here to prove they possessed more than just inherited wealth and genetically engineered advantages. The philosophy was simple, arguably pretentious, and carved into 17 different languages across the entrance hall. When technology fails, nature answers. If you cannot hear her voice, you were never truly alive. The instructors loved that motto. They'd repeat it with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious texts, conveniently ignoring that they monitored everything from climate-controlled offices with real-time biometric tracking and enough processing power to simulate entire ecosystems. But hypocrisy aside, the Institute did produce results. Graduates went on to lead colonial expeditions, command exploration vessels, and survive situations that would have killed softer individuals within hours. The current cohort represented 12 species from 9 star systems, each one convinced they'd dominate the final examination. There was Xenris, a Kraver, whose exoskeleton could deflect small arms fire, and whose culture viewed pain as a greeting. Beside him sat Vesili, a Silurith, whose ancestors had evolved in eternal darkness, developing bio-luminescence that could blind prey at 15 meters. The Venthkar twins, Tamora and Tamira, possessed metabolic systems that could process anything from toxic algae to radioactive minerals, turning poison into nutrition through sheer biological spite. And then there was the human. She sat in the back row, average height, average build, skin that burned in direct sunlight, teeth designed for an omnivorous diet that required cooking, and exactly 0 natural weapons unless you counted sarcasm. Her name didn't matter to the other cadets. They'd already dismissed her as a charity case, some diversity initiative to prove the Institute accepted even the galaxy's more unfortunate species. Humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel 8 decades ago, barely enough time to stop being impressed by automatic doors. Instructor Valk entered the amphitheater with the kind of dramatic flair that suggested he'd practiced in front of mirrors. His species, the Corinths, had been spacefaring for 2 millennia and never let anyone forget it. 6 arms gestured in perfect synchronization as holographic displays erupted around the room. "Your final examination begins in 6 hours," he announced, voice resonating with harmonics that made it sound like 3 people talking in unison. "You will be transported to designation V-447, a Class 4 hostile environment world. No technology, no supplies beyond standard clothing. 72 hours to demonstrate everything you've learned." The hologram shifted, showing a rotating planet of browns, greens, and blues. Continents stretched across its surface, each marked with drop zones color-coded by biome type. "You will be separated by environmental compatibility," Val continued. "The Kraver will deploy to mountainous volcanic regions, Silurith to cave systems, Venthkar to marshlands with suitable toxicity levels." He paused, manipulating the display with 2 hands, while the other 4 gestured for emphasis. "Each zone has been selected to challenge you despite your natural advantages. We are not interested in easy victories." Kranix clicked his mandibles in what passed for a smile among his kind. "Finally, a proper test. These simulations have been insulting." "Agreed," Vesidi added, her luminescence pulsing with confidence. 72 hours. "I'll signal extraction after 48 from boredom." The instructor's expression suggested he'd heard this exact sentiment from countless cohorts before. His multiple eyes drifted to the back row, where the human sat taking notes on an actual paper pad, another primitive affectation her species seemed to prefer. And our human cadet will deploy to a temperate river valley, moderate climate, varied ecosystem, numerous resources for those capable of recognizing them. Resources. Tamora laughed, her voice carrying the slight hiss common to her species. She can't metabolize half the proteins on that world without processing. No venom, no armor, no specialized sensory organs. How is this fair? The instructor's face remained neutral. The examination doesn't measure fairness. It measures capability. Nature doesn't provide equal advantages. She provides different ones. Your task is to recognize and utilize what's available. Assuming anything is available to someone so biologically limited, Tamora muttered. The human looked up from her notes, meeting the instructor's gaze briefly. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself, just returned to whatever she was writing with the kind of calm that either indicated confidence or acceptance of inevitable failure. The other cadets assumed the latter. 6 hours later, drop pods screamed through V-447's atmosphere like falling stars, each one carrying a cadet toward their designated testing ground. The pods were designed for one-way trips, comfortable enough to prevent injury but deliberately unequipped with emergency supplies. When the door opened, you walked out with exactly what you were wearing. Everything else had to come from the planet itself. The human's pod hit ground near a river bend, the impact cushioned by hydraulics that would have impressed engineers a century ago but now qualified as standard safety equipment. The door hissed open, and she stepped into air that smelled of wet earth and vegetation, carrying the kind of humidity that promised rain within hours. She stood there for a full minute, just breathing, eyes scanning the landscape with the methodical patience of someone conducting inventory. The river moved sluggishly, brown with sediment, perhaps 15 meters wide at this point. Vegetation crowded both banks, a mix of reed-like plants standing in the shallows and broader-leafed species creating canopy cover further back. Rocky outcroppings jutted from the riverbed, smooth from years of water flow. Orbital observation room, 300 kilometers above. Instructor Valk watched multiple feeds simultaneously. Kranix had already begun hunting, smashing through underbrush with the subtlety of a chemical explosion. Vesely had located a cave system and was establishing territory. The Venthkar twins were literally eating swamp plants to test their toxicity levels, which looked horrifying but was apparently standard procedure for their species. The human feed showed her still standing near the pod, occasionally crouching to examine plants, touching stones, watching the water's movement. Assistant Instructor Pelix, a younger Corinth still learning the profession's nuances, kept glancing at that particular feed with increasing concern. She's been stationary for 12 minutes. Pelix observed. Shouldn't she be securing food or shelter? The sun sets in 4 hours. Valgak's primary eyes remained fixed on the displays, while his secondary pair focused on his assistant. What do you see her doing? Nothing. She's just looking at things. Look closer. Pelix magnified the feed. The human had moved to the water's edge, running her hand along a stand of reeds, testing their flexibility, checking where they grew thickest. She pulled one free, examined its structure, then collected several more, choosing specific specimens while leaving others. She's gathering materials, Pelix realized. She's doing reconnaissance, Valga corrected. Those reeds grow in patterns that indicate water depth and current strength. She's reading the river's geography before committing to any location. Notice how she hasn't moved more than 20 meters from the drop site. She's establishing a mental map of immediate resources before expanding her search radius. But the other cadets are already hunting, building shelters. The other cadets are burning energy on assumptions. She's investing time in information. Let's see which strategy proves more efficient. By the time the sun reached its apex, the human had collected an assortment of items that would have looked like random garbage to an untrained observer. Reeds of varying thickness bundled together, smooth stones in different sizes, vine-like plants stripped from trees, tested for flexibility and strength, flat pieces of bark, several straight branches, each examined and selected for qualities only she seemed to understand. The other feeds told different stories. Kernix had successfully killed something large and furry, but was now struggling to preserve the meat in volcanic heat. Vess's Illy's bio-luminescence had attracted swarms of flying creatures that she couldn't shake off without exhausting herself further. One of the Ventskar twins had eaten something that disagreed with even her ridiculous metabolism and was currently vomiting behind a tree while her sister stood guard. 3 cadets had already signaled for emergency extraction. One Threxil whose camouflage ability worked perfectly, but whose species had never developed persistent hunting skills, meaning he couldn't actually catch anything despite being invisible. 2 Korvans whose cold-adapted biology was failing in their assigned desert zone despite the Institute's assurances about temperature regulation. The human sat cross-legged beside her collection of materials and began working with the kind of focus that suggested she'd done this 1,000 times before. Her hands moved constantly, taking the thinnest reeds and stripping them into even thinner fibers. Then those fibers got twisted together, 2 at a time, each twist creating tension that held them together. When 2 became 4, 4 became 8, 8 became a cord. What is she making? Pelix asked, genuinely puzzled. Fishing line, Valker said quietly. She's creating cordage from plant fibers. That's a skill that predates her species' written language. But we have 17 species in this cohort with natural advantages for fishing. The Krever can simply grab fish from rivers with their reflexes. The Silurith can stun them with light pulses. She's spending hours creating a tool for something others do instinctively. Others do it for 1 fish at a time, expending energy with each attempt. She's building infrastructure. Keep watching. The cord grew longer, thicker in some sections, thinner in others where she deliberately varied the twist. She tested its strength repeatedly, pulling until it showed strain but never quite breaking, learning its limits. Then came the hooks, fashioned from bone fragments she'd found near the river, probably from some predator's previous meal. She shaped them using rocks, grinding and scraping until they curved properly, sharp enough to penetrate but angled to prevent escape. Next came the weir trap, and this demonstrated something the instructors hadn't expected: spatial reasoning that suggested genuine understanding of behavioral patterns. She waded into the river, reading the current, finding where fish would naturally swim based on water flow and depth. Then she planted reeds in a V-shape, narrow end pointing downstream, wider end facing upstream. The construction funneled fish into an increasingly confined space, basic but effective. By the time sunset painted the sky in colors that didn't quite match Earth's atmosphere, the human had 3 fishing lines set at different depths, 2 weir traps positioned in different current speeds, and a makeshift spear leaning against a tree just in case opportunity presented itself. Then she built fire, not with fancy technology or even basic fire-starting tools. She carved a notch in a flat piece of wood, found a straight stick that fit perfectly, and began spinning it between her palms with the kind of patience that made watching it feel like a meditation exercise. Smoke appeared first, wisps of grey that promised more. Then an ember, glowing red in the gathering darkness. She transferred it carefully to a nest of dried grass and bark shavings, breathing on it with controlled exhales until flames erupted. The fire served multiple purposes. Light, obviously. Warmth as temperatures dropped. But she was already using it to smoke strips of plant material she'd tested for edibility, preserving them before she'd even caught any protein. Planning for success before it happened. "She has food," Pelix announced suddenly, pointing at one of the fishing lines. Something silver thrashed in the shallows, hooked and unable to escape. The human retrieved it calmly, dispatched it efficiently, and had it cleaned within minutes. But instead of eating immediately, she prepared it for smoking, hanging it near the fire on a rack she'd constructed from green branches. Then she checked her other lines and traps. 2 more fish in the weir traps. 4 total in the first hour of active fishing. Instructor Valker leaned back in his chair, multiple arms folded in a gesture that indicated deep thought. "Pull up the other feeds. I want comparisons." The screens shifted, showing the remaining cadets in split view. Karnix had managed to preserve some of his kill by burying it in volcanic ash, but looked exhausted from the hunt and the heat. Vesili had finally escaped the flying swarms by retreating deep into her caves, but had caught nothing, and was relying on stored body fat. The remaining Xenris twin had recovered, but was still searching for food sources, toxic enough for her metabolism, everything else passing through her system without providing nutrition. The human had caught 6 fish by the time full darkness arrived. She'd eaten 1, was smoking 4, and had saved 1 as bait for the next day. Her shelter was basic but functional, built against a rock outcropping that provided wind protection and radiated retained heat. She'd even woven a mat from reeds to sleep on, keeping herself off the damp ground. 24 hours into the examination, and the human had surplus. "This is unprecedented," Pelix whispered, watching the human check her traps by firelight. "She's not just surviving. She's thriving. She's doing what her species has always done." Valga replied. "Humans don't have biological advantages. They have intellectual ones. They don't adapt to environments. They adapt environments to themselves." Day 2 brought more extractions. Koenig's finally admitted defeat after a volcanic vent erupted near his camp, filling the area with toxic gases his armor couldn't protect against. Vesili's energy reserves hit critical levels, her bioluminescence flickering like a dying light. The Xenris twin found food but attracted a predator. Her poison couldn't deter, forcing an emergency pickup. The human spent day 2 improving her situation. Better traps, positioned after she'd observed fish behavior patterns throughout the previous night and morning. A more efficient smoking rack that allowed her to preserve more food simultaneously. She even attempted primitive pottery, shaping river clay into containers and hardening them in her fire. The first 2 cracked, but the third held water, which meant she could boil things, which meant expanded food options. She explored further from camp, always returning before dark, mapping the area with the kind of thoroughness that suggested military training, or perhaps just common sense taken to its logical extreme. She found clay deposits, better stone for tools, trees with bark that stripped easily for cordage, and a berry bush she tested carefully before consuming. The testing process fascinated the instructors. She didn't just eat random plants hoping for the best. She rubbed samples on her inner wrist, waiting for reactions. Then on her lips. Then a tiny amount on her tongue. Only after hours of observation and no adverse effects did she actually swallow anything. Slow, methodical, safe. Her species must have incredible poison resistance, Pelix theorized. Actually the opposite, Valga corrected. Humans are remarkably vulnerable to toxins. That's why she's so careful. She can't rely on biology to save her from mistakes, so she doesn't make mistakes. By day 3, 7 cadets remained in the examination. 3 were barely holding on, weakened by exposure and hunger, counting hours until extraction. 3 others were managing adequately, surviving but not comfortable, doing exactly what the examination required and nothing more. And then there was the human. She'd built a functioning camp that looked almost permanent. Multiple fishing operations running simultaneously, a food surplus that would have lasted a week, fire management that required minimal maintenance. She'd even improved her clothing, weaving plant fibers into a hat that provided sun protection and a basket for carrying resources. She wasn't just answering nature anymore. She was having a full conversation with it, and nature was apparently quite chatty once you learned the language. The extraction shuttles arrived precisely at the 72-hour mark, descending through atmosphere with the kind of punctuality that military operations required. Drop zones became pickup zones, and exhausted cadets stumbled toward salvation with expressions of relief that bordered on religious experiences. The human emerged from her camp, carrying her basket filled with smoked fish, her cordage coiled neatly, several tools she'd crafted, and what appeared to be a fairly detailed map sketched onto bark using charcoal. She looked rested, clean, and entirely unbothered by the fact that she'd just spent 3 days in a hostile environment with zero technology. The shuttle pilot, a Corinth who'd seen countless pickups, actually did a double take when she boarded. "Successful examination?" he asked, following protocol. "Educational," she replied, settling into a seat and immediately offering smoked fish to the 3 cadets who'd been picked up from nearby zones. They looked at the food, then at her, then at the food again, with the kind of hunger that overrode pride. "You made this?" one asked, accepting a piece with trembling hands. River provided the fish, reeds provided the smoking rack, fire provided the preservation. I just put the pieces together. The cadet ate in silence, too exhausted for further conversation, but the look exchanged between the others suggested a fundamental recalculation of previous assumptions. The weak, limited, biologically disadvantaged human had just casually shared surplus resources, while they'd barely survived using supposedly superior natural abilities. Back in the observation room, Instructor Vol compiled his final assessment reports, but his mind kept returning to that human feed. 72 hours of watching someone work with quiet competence, never panicking, never rushing, just methodically converting available resources into survival infrastructure. "What's your evaluation?" Pelix asked, reviewing his own notes. "Top marks, obviously." She demonstrated resource identification, tool creation, planning, adaptation, and surplus generation. Any one of those would merit passing. All of them together represents exemplary performance. The other cadets are requesting score adjustments. They're claiming the examination was biased toward species without natural advantages. Volga's laugh rumbled through multiple harmonic frequencies. Of course they are. They're just now realizing that natural advantages become weaknesses when you rely on them exclusively. The Krevo was too aggressive for a volcanic environment. The Silurith exhausted herself with abilities that worked perfectly in her home world but drained resources here. The Venskar couldn't find suitable toxins because not every planet caters to such specialized biology. And the human did what humans do. She looked at a river and saw fishing line, looked at reeds and saw construction materials, looked at stones and saw tools waiting to be shaped. Her species spent hundreds of thousands of years surviving on a planet that was actively trying to kill them, with none of the biological advantages other species take for granted. No venom, no armor, no specialized metabolism. Just a brain that could solve problems and hands that could build solutions. Pelix processed this, multiple arms fidgeting with data pads. So the examination wasn't testing survival skills, It was testing adaptability. Every examination tests adaptability, whether we admit it or not. The ones who succeed are those who recognize that nature doesn't answer your demands. You have to learn her language first. Ask the right questions. Listen to the responses. Vulgus pulled up the final statistics, comparing performance metrics across all cadets. The human asked better questions. The debriefing session occurred 3 days later, after cadets had recovered from their ordeal and processed their experiences. The amphitheater felt different now, tension replacing the earlier arrogance. Everyone had seen the final scores. Everyone knew who dominated the examination, despite being the least biologically equipped for it. The human sat in the same back row, taking notes on the same paper pad, looking exactly as unremarkable as she had before the examination. But the seats around her were no longer empty. Several cadets had quietly repositioned themselves closer, suddenly interested in study partnerships with someone who demonstrated capabilities their expensive educations had overlooked. Instructor Vulgus addressed the assembly with the kind of satisfaction that came from lessons successfully taught through experience rather than lectures. This cohort's performance revealed important truths about survival in hostile environments. Natural advantages matter less than cognitive flexibility. Biological specialization creates dependencies that become liabilities in variable conditions. The ability to recognize and utilize available resources outperforms genetic optimization for specific scenarios. He pulled up footage from the examination, showing side-by-side comparisons that made his point without requiring further explanation. Crunks smashing through obstacles versus the human carefully testing plant flexibility. Vasily burning energy on bioluminescence versus the human building fire. The Venskar twins eating toxic plants versus the human methodically testing everything before consumption. The highest performing cadet brought back more food than she could eat, tools she'd crafted from raw materials, detailed environmental documentation, and offered to share resources with struggling teammates. She accomplished this without venom, without armor, without specialized metabolism, without any of the advantages you've spent your lives assuming made you superior. The human didn't react to the attention, just kept taking notes, though one corner of her mouth suggested she was fighting a smile. Questions? Velk asked. Boranx raised a claw, mandibles clicking with something that might have been respect. How did she know which plants to use for fishing line, which stones made the best tools, where fish would swim? The human looked up, meeting his gaze. I didn't. Not specifically, but patterns repeat across ecosystems. Flexible plants usually have fibrous interiors. Smooth river stones work for grinding. Fish follow currents and seek shelter in specific conditions. You learn the patterns, test your assumptions carefully, and adjust based on results. It's not instinct. It's systematic problem solving. But that takes time, Vasily protested, her bioluminescence pulsing weakly. Time you could spend hunting or gathering with natural abilities. It takes time up front, the human agreed. But it saves energy overall. I spent half a day building fishing infrastructure that worked continuously for 3 days while I slept, explored, improved my camp, and planned for the next week if the examination had continued. You spent 3 days actively hunting individual prey, burning energy constantly, with nothing to show for it when you exhausted yourself. The silence that followed felt heavy with recalculation. Species that had evolved perfect adaptations for their home worlds were suddenly confronting the uncomfortable reality that perfection in one context meant limitations in others. My species calls it the jack-of-all-trades advantage, The human continued, returning to her notes. We're not the strongest, fastest, or most specialized at anything, but we're adequately capable at everything, which means we can function in almost any environment if we're willing to learn, adapt, and build what we need. Instructor Velkar nodded, multiple arms gesturing toward the human, as if presenting evidence in a long-running argument. This is why the Institute's philosophy emphasizes environmental integration over biological superiority. Technology fails, genetic advantages prove inadequate, but the ability to observe, learn, and create solutions, that survives any situation. The final scores remained posted for a full week, a reminder that assumptions about strength, advantage, and capability often collapsed under actual testing conditions. The human graduated top of her cohort, received recruitment offers from 17 colonial expeditions, and politely declined all of them to accept a teaching position at the Institute itself. Turned out, the galaxy needed instructors who could explain how to twist reeds into fishing line, how to read rivers for optimal trap placement, and how to build surplus from nothing but observation and patience. Natural advantages were impressive, but teachable skills, those could save lives in environments where biology forgot to provide solutions. The pretentious motto carved into the entrance hall remained unchanged, still promising that nature would answer those who could hear her voice. But future cadets would learn a crucial addition to that philosophy, usually delivered during week 1 of training by a human instructor, with a talent for sarcasm and a basket full of smoked fish. Nature does answer, but only if you're asking the right questions in a language she understands. And if you can't speak her language yet, well, you'd better learn fast, because she doesn't repeat herself, doesn't grade on curves, and absolutely does not care about your genetic advantages or your prestigious family lineage. She's been having this conversation for billions of years with countless species. Most of them are extinct now, the ones who survived. They learned to listen,